Welcome to another edition of Jazz Smack Postgame, where the Jazz played at home tonight in the Delta Center in front of home fans against the Toronto Raptors. Now, this was an interesting game from a lineup standpoint, and there is some obvious, massive frustration with the situation from Collin Sexton's standpoint. He's not happy. So let's go ahead and talk about it.
Jazz Smack, your source for information and analysis about the Utah Jazz and NBA basketball. Jazz Smack is a community for passionate Utah Jazz NBA fans.
Well, frustration really boiled over tonight with Collin in the second half. In the first half of the game, he received 10 minutes of playing time, just 10 minutes, in a game where he could have clearly played more, but he played 10 minutes. Jordan Clarkson also played 10 minutes. In the second half, Collin, he's in the game for a few minutes. He sees that he's going to get yanked because Jordan is at the scorer's table to check in, and so Collin knows he's going out. So I don't blame Collin for really doing this. I really don't. So he forced some shots when he obviously knew that he was going out, and will he even get back in the game? That should be a good question. So he forced some shots, he made some turnovers, and it turned out to be a really bad game for Collin. The video showed him on the bench, and he was punching the seat back of the chair. He was really unhappy. Obviously, Coach Hardy went and sat next to him on the bench and tried to calm him down and reassure him, and his teammates were obviously patting him on the back. But there are obvious issues here. And this is one of the problems. I think the Jazz are making a big mistake. I think Collin is one of the guys that should be getting time and should be getting numbers so that he can be traded, because he's clearly not going to be with the Jazz for the long term when the Jazz finally are able to turn things around and be competitive for something meaningful. Collin's not going to be part of that. I mean, it would be shocking if Collin were part of that. So there's I can understand, and I've been an advocate for this, for the Jazz losing games, because the Jazz need to obviously get a top 10 player somehow, and the best way to do that is through a high lottery pick. So the Jazz need to lose. But that doesn't help Collin Sexton. That doesn't help his value to another team in his next contract. Him getting limited minutes so the Jazz can lose doesn't help him. Him sitting on the bench so all the young guys can get minutes, and even Jordan Clarkson, which is completely inexplicable, getting minutes. These things do not help Collin Sexton. And obviously, the frustration just boiled over, and when he saw Jordan Clarkson at the scorer's table going to check in for him, and then he forced some shots, and he committed some turnovers because he knew he was going out of the game after only a few minutes in the second half. And who knows if he's even going to get to come back in the game again at that point, considering he only played 10 minutes in the first half. He forced some shots, and he committed some turnovers. And he ended up playing a really bad game. And he's on the bench, and he's going through it, and you could see that he's just miserably upset. I mean, he's upset. Obviously upset, visibly upset, and frustrated. And the Jazz are just in a different place than Collin. It's better for Collin if the Jazz were to win games and play him minutes so that he can get his numbers as well and contribute to some wins. Yet the Jazz are in a situation where they need to lose. And those are just two incompatible things. And this is why I hope that the Jazz can find a trade for Collin in the offseason that benefits both parties. That's the best case scenario right now, because it's just not working out. It's not good for either party. The way things are is just not good. So I just hope that they can find something where they can trade him. I mean, maybe it's even part of a bigger package with Collin and other Jazz players going elsewhere. Whatever it may be, Collin needs a new destination. The pairing with the Jazz is just not working out. His numbers actually aren't bad this year, and we will look at that when we look at the box score and whatnot, and we'll look at his stats for the year. His numbers aren't terrible in terms of his historical, looking at all of his seasons. His percentages aren't bad, but obviously the minutes are down a bit. His points are obviously down from what they were peak in Cleveland, and he clearly has the capability to score more points at a high efficiency than he is now. And it's just not in the cards for what the Jazz are trying to do. Now, I think they could do a much better job with Collin, but they've chosen this other pathway, and Hardy, he's clearly not one of Hardy's guys. That's plain as day. So anyway, that's what I wanted to start with, because I saw that tonight, and I saw him, and I just felt bad for him. I honestly just felt bad. I feel for him. I understand. I get it. I get the frustration. I get the frustration with his role, with the situation with the team, with the playing of all the young guys. I mean, it just is a lousy, stinking situation for Collin Sexton at the moment. But now let's shift to the Jazz franchise itself. So the league fines the Utah Jazz for sitting Lauri Markkanen. They fine the team they fine the franchise $100,000. So then the Jazz play Lauri in the last game, and in this game they play Lauri in the first half. And then in the second half, he doesn't play at all. He comes out and he just sits on the bench, no more playing time. In the first half, Lauri, he put up a lot of points and he had some rebounds, but he didn't shoot the ball particularly well again. He shot 35% from the game. He shot 50% from three, but 35% overall. 5 for 14. Again, it's not a good night for Lauri shooting the ball. And Lauri's had a really rough year shooting the ball. I mean, he's shooting 42.4%, I believe. As of going into tonight's game, he was shooting 42.4% from the field. And that is way below where he was, and his points are down. I mean, his best year in Utah, he scored 24 points a game with much higher field goal percentage, and now he's at 19.1, I believe. And so he's way down. I mean, his numbers are just really off this year. He's just having a lousy year. So I think it would be better for the Jazz to improve those numbers as well. And obviously that's to the Jazz's benefit if they are going to try and trade Lauri this summer. Lauri having his numbers so low, I mean, his value is obviously it's not what it was at the end of last year, what it is right now. And even if he has a stellar rest of the season, he's not going to improve his numbers enough to even come close to where they were last year. And so I don't know what the severity of his back issues are. I clearly think there is some sort of an issue there. I don't think the Jazz just sat him the entire year just to sit him the entire year. And I don't think his percentages would have fallen off so much had there not been some sort of physical ailment. Now, how serious is it? I don't know. But there's clearly something going on. I mean, his numbers are just really, really off. And that's unfortunate because Lauri Markkanen is obviously the Jazz most valuable trade asset right now, and what could bring back the most draft assets or a high potential younger player who's already on someone's roster. But I mean, with the numbers that he has right now, and considering the size of that contract that he signed last summer, boy, I mean, it's putting the Jazz in a really tough spot. I mean, they might not be able to, even if they want to trade him this summer, they might not be able to because his numbers are just so off from what they were previously. I mean, he's clearly not earning that contract right now. And he's also playing very few games. I mean, one thing about Lauri is, I mean, he's his high game number, I think, for his career is 62 or something like that, or maybe it was 68. But it was somewhere in the 60s. So he's typically, most years, he's playing in the 50s. And this year, going into this game, I think he was at 44. So he may not even get to, he may end up in mid-50s at best this year. The Jazz have something like 15 games left. So he may end up in the 50s this year at best, in the mid-50s. He may play another 10 games. Oh, he's not shown durability as an NBA player, and now he has a max contract with down numbers plus the durability issue. I mean, the Jazz are not in a good place to get maximum value for Lauri like they were in a position to possibly get max value for him last summer. Oh, it's a difficult situation with what has transpired this season. I mean, the Jazz are just in a difficult trading scenario position. And the other player they obviously are playing that is a veteran who still has a contract, another year on his contract after this one, is Jordan. But we've talked about him ad nauseum, and I don't want to talk about him anymore. I honestly still don't know why he's playing. It makes no sense. But whatever. Anyway, so why don't we take a look at the box score just for the sake of looking at it tonight. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. It was kind of pointless. I mean, the Jazz, they don't play Lauri in the second half. So he plays the first half, goes 5 for 14, scores 16 points. He doesn't play the second half. So another interesting thing about what the Jazz did, starting that fourth quarter, the game was reasonably close, and it had been reasonably close up until that point. So what Hardy does, in order to make sure that the team loses, Hardy starts 5 players where the tallest 2 guys are Johnny Juzang, who measured out at 6'5.5" at the pre-draft measurements at the combine, and then KJ Martin at 6'6". So their tallest player was KJ Martin at 6'6" to start the fourth quarter. So they played like 2 minutes with that lineup. Toronto goes on like an 8-0 or a 10-0 run, and then Hardy calls a timeout after the Jazz are behind by 12 or 13. After 2 minutes, he calls the timeout because the mission had been accomplished. They got way behind, and then they could shuffle up the lineup and do some other things and play some other guys again, play Filipowski again, put in some more size, and make it more competitive possibly, but not overcome the substantial deficit. And that's exactly what transpired. So they purposely threw the game starting the fourth quarter by playing a lineup that, honestly, I don't even recall an NBA team having the tallest guy, the tallest player on their court at any time being 6'6". That is really small for NBA standards. I mean, I honestly can't even believe they did that. But they did it, and they got the loss, so more power to them. But it's just really strange. Anyway, so is the NBA going to do anything to the Jazz for purposely throwing games like they just did? I mean, I don't know if I recall a more blatant attempt or purposely losing a game than that. I mean, that's obvious. Yes, they didn't sit Lauri the whole game, but they sat him the second half, and they sat Walker again. I mean, it's just, like I've always said, it would be so much better if I could just hope that the team wins and that the Jazz could play to win rather than this nonsense of trying to lose to get draft position. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And this whole thing, it's so preposterous, you couldn't even imagine that a professional sport would end up in this situation. And here we are. So anyway, the box score is, I mean, the game's a mess, and there's not a real, I mean, Jordan is the high scorer in the game at 19 points. Like, it's just, the whole thing's a disaster. It really is. And Isaiah Collier had some nice moments tonight. I think he was probably, in my opinion, the bright spot. I think he and Kyle are probably the two bright spots of the game. And obviously it was another player development game with, aside from the whole Jordan Clarkson thing thrown in there, playing 23 minutes. So he's playing some of the most minutes in the game again. And that is just inexplicable. And being the high scorer is also inexplicable. Obviously, the 9 field goal attempts and nine free throw attempts, he ends up as the high scorer with 19. But I thought the two standout players tonight were Kyle Filipowski with the 5 for 11 from the field, 3 for 5 from 3 again. Boy, he's shooting the ball so well from 3. I mean, it's just so impressive. And now he's making free throws better too. He went 5 for 6 tonight, with 11 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, 1 block. 18 points. He's just playing so well. And he did get, Kyle did get nice minutes tonight at 33. And then Isaiah Collier also, the 36 minutes, 6 for 11 from the field, 4 for 5 from the free throw line, 5 rebounds, 8 assists, 1 steal. 16 points. Those are fantastic numbers. Those are fantastic numbers for the Jazz's future. Getting those numbers now, giving them time, that's what the rest of this season should be about, other than I think that Collin Sexton really needs to get time in order to maximize his value. It just worries me that he is not being placed in the pecking order of priorities, and he should be a priority. But anyway, it was just a bunch of young guys getting minutes tonight, and that's what all it really amounts to. The game was messy. There wasn't great continuity or flow to it. It was just messy, and that's kind of what you would expect considering the situation. With Jaden Springer getting 17 minutes tonight, and Johnny getting 24, KJ Martin getting 21, Bryce getting 21, Clarkson getting 23. These are just it's just and Cody also had 26 minutes. So it's just a strange night. It's another strange night, and I have a feeling there are going to be a lot more strange nights between now and the end of the season. But the other thing, obviously, is the whole Collin Sexton thing. So if we look at Collin's numbers for this year, so he's playing in the 24-25 season, he's playing 28 minutes a game. He's averaging 18.2, and this was before tonight, and he's averaging 18.2 points. He's getting 14 field goal attempts per night. He's shooting 47% from the field. He's shooting 40% from 3, and he's shooting 88% from the free throw line. So 4.3 assists, 2.6 turnovers, 0.7 steals, 0.1 blocks, 3 rebounds. So he's having a good season. That's a good season. 28 minutes a game I'd rather see him get a few more minutes in order to boost his numbers more. And because he's still the 13.6 field goal attempts, his high in the 2021 season with Cleveland was 18.4. So he was getting nearly 5 field goal attempts per game more in that season for the Cavs than he is now. So obviously, if he shoots at the same percentage on those 5 extra field goal attempts, which I believe he's fully capable of doing, he would be right there close to what he was with Cleveland at that 24 points a game. And I don't see any reason why he can't shoot at least his current field goal percentage, if not better. And the 40% from 3 obviously is really good. And Collin has shot the 3 ball reasonably well from a percentage standpoint in his career. He only had really one bad year in the 21-22 season, and that's the season that he only played 11 games with the Cavs. So in that season, he shot 24.4%, and that's really not representative of his other years. The other previous low year that he had was 37.1. and that was on 4.4 attempts per game in the 2021 season. So his field goal percentages and everything are really good right now. Yes, he's at a low point with the Jazz of 47.3. Last year he was at 48.7, and the year before that, his first year with Utah, he was at 50.6. His only career year where he shot 50% or better from the field. But last year, I mean, he played 78 games with the Jazz last year, and he shot 49%. That's a good number. For a guard his size, 49%, especially with how many three-point field goals are being shot now in the NBA, shooting upwards right around 50%. I mean, that's a really high number. That's a really great number. So his numbers are still really good this year, but they could be better with a few more minutes. And obviously the frustration with where things stand right now, I just don't think Collin is happy losing games. And I know he wants to play and play well, and it means a lot to him. And I really feel bad for the guy. And I just hope that something can be resolved in the offseason where he is playing elsewhere and the Jazz can get something in return that's of meaningful value, because Collin's good enough where the Jazz should get something in return that's of meaningful value. I mean, they just can't give him away for some stiff or some really low draft pick. I mean, that serves absolutely no purpose, because Collin obviously was a significant piece in that trade with the Cavs. Yes, the biggest thing was Lauri, obviously, but Collin was right there. Collin was also a valuable piece in addition to the draft picks. Oh, anyway, where do the Jazz stand right now in terms of the tank? And so these are updated standings. So the Jazz are sitting pretty as far as that goes. I mean, they are obviously in a race for one of those 3 worst records, and now they are 2 wins behind the number 3 worst team. So the Jazz are in the number 2 spot behind Washington. They're only 1 win up on Washington right now, but they're 2 wins behind Charlotte, which is really, really important. Really important. And they're 3 wins behind New Orleans. So all those numbers are super important right now. Being 3 wins behind that 4 spot where you just do not want to end up in that 4 spot. That's where your percentages go, as you can see from getting that top pick, where your percentage goes from 14% to 12.5% with the 4 spot. So you don't want to, obviously the 14 to 12.5, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it's something. So you don't want to slip to that 4th spot. The Jazz have to be in the top 3, and the higher they can get to that 1st spot, that means the lower their downside position of where they could draft should the worst happen and multiple teams move up in the draft through getting really lucky in the lottery. So you want to limit your downside too. So the higher they can get in that in that pecking order. Right now they're at 2. Is it possible to go to 1? It's possible. I think it's unlikely, because Washington is by far the worst team in the NBA. By far. And so it would be really difficult to get to that 1 position, even though they only are up by 1 win right now. I don't think that the Washington Wizards are going to be willing to relinquish that number 1 draft position right now, because they've obviously suffered through a really difficult year, as have the Jazz. So for them to get removed from that number 1 position at this point in the season, I doubt that they're going to allow that to happen. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But anyway, I think that covers pretty much everything that was even remotely interesting with tonight's game. It was just a strange night, and it wasn't particularly interesting, in all honesty. From a basketball standpoint, it's interesting to see what the Jazz were doing with the lineups and how they actually made sure that they were going to lose this game, because it was so blatantly obvious what they did do in that second half, which, from a viewership standpoint, obviously that's not the greatest thing. I mean, it just isn't. But they did it, And they got the loss, which is the most important thing for the franchise moving forward. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, I think that I'm going to call it a night, and I would appreciate it if you, for everybody out there who are watching on YouTube, to please like, share, and subscribe. And you can also follow us on X at Jazz Smack. And we will talk to everybody later, and I hope that everybody has a wonderful evening and weekend. Good night, everybody.